Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 59 for May 2016. I am your co-host, the first, Quinn Dunkey, and with me as always is co-host the second, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
Seems like we just posted one of these, didn't we?
We did. Funny thing about a monthly show, sometimes the schedules line up oddly, and the shows, they might be far apart or close together for us, but hopefully they're reasonably spaced for the listeners.
Yeah, and sometimes it makes some of the news items a little bit stale, but that's okay. I think they'll forgive us since we're reporting on a 40-year-old computer company.
That's right. And as we always say, despite all the news on our show, we are not a news show.
That's right.
We just we talk about general subjects of interest that are Apple II related, sometimes vaguely.
Yeah. So speaking of that, this month, I guess I should ask, how are you, Quinn?
Oh, I'm excellent.
Okay.
Again, since we're kind of compressed with our last recording, not much to talk about retro computing wise, but getting ready for KFest.
Excellent. Sounds like a lot of fun. So this month is a little bit special. We are incredibly lazy here at Open Apple, and we will take any opportunity to get out of doing any work. And this month, Kevin Savetz has been our patsy, our unknowing victim, and we are using an interview or two that he did for that amazing Atari interview show that he does over at Atari Age, Boo Atari. And, do you know anything about these, Quinn, or are we just going to lead into it?
Not a lot, actually.
Okay.
We're gonna pretend that we know all about what's about to be in these interviews. But Kevin let us know he had these interviews that were Apple centric. Amy Kefauver and Lorri Hopping of Microzine. And he offered them to run them on Open Apple since they weren't entirely Atari, Boo Atari related. So yay, Kevin Savetz. And we'll present those, I guess, without further comment.
Hi, I'm Bob Bishop, and you're listening to the Open Apple Podcast.
I was an English lit major in college, and I knew I wanted to be in children's publishing, so I came to New York. And Scholastic was my second job, and I started off in the book club division where, I don't know if you remember, but, getting those little cheapy paperback books in your classroom, which I loved as a kid, and I got to work there.
I love that too, sure.
I know. It was like the best part of the month was when the Scholastic books came. And so I just sort of worked my way through a couple of different divisions at Scholastic. And then I was in the classroom magazine division, working on a magazine for fifth grade kids. And Scholastic recognized that computers were coming into the classroom, and so they needed to have a presence there. And so they started a whole new division. And very quickly after they started up, they posted some jobs, and I applied, and I was completely thrilled to be part of it.
So you were editor of Microzine?
I joined as an associate editor. The guy that was my boss was a part of the very first team. And after I had worked for him, I think it was about a year, he went on to other projects within the division, and then they bumped me up to editor.
Was Microzine marketed directly to schools? I mean, who was supposed to be buying Microzine? Was it the schools? Was it parents?
It was the schools, and it was whoever was making the buying decision. Usually it was often a sort of a central person for a school district or something. And so our marketing people were going directly to the schools, and we published guides for the teachers, teaching, documentation and stuff for the teachers, and then material for the parents. But it was really the schools that were our customers.
And did you have a sense of if a school, would they buy one copy? Were they buying 10 copies? Were they buying one for the whole lab?
Well, that turned out to be an interesting marketing event. We started publishing it as a magazine, which meant that you would buy a subscription and you would get 5 issues during the course of a school year. So they did that initially. Then it turned out that they could also make additional monies by selling individual back issues. And unfortunately, very quickly on, we heard from teachers, they said, oh, we absolutely adore Microzine. And then the salesperson would say, great, so we can sign you up for another year. And they said, we don't need to, because we've got a whole new bunch of kids, and these are great, and they're holding up. And so we have everything we need. And we thought, well, gee, that isn't what we want to hear.
Oh,
so
right.
They marketed it as a library on a disc, meaning you are always building your library. And as it turned out, certain elements were the same issue to issue. There's always a twist-a-plot, but the other three programs were always different. And since the goal was to have this be an initial introduction to kids to the, what the computer can do and all the different utilities and things that it can do, we were able to keep tapping into different curriculum areas, science or history, and different things that the computer could do. Very quickly did a database and very quickly did accounting and a little word processor and stuff. But after that, it was more hitting different areas of the curriculum so the teachers could see the value in continuing to subscribe. So it sort of to go back, what you asked me a little bit ago was, I think it was used both in computer labs and in individual classrooms. But were you about to ask me how did we decide what the content was?
Yeah, how did you decide what the curriculum was? Were you guys, Scholastic, I'm sure, knows a little bit about about making curriculum, but was this within were you working with outside teachers, or were you making it up as you went along, or how was that?
Well, we had a really good, Scholastic's a big company, and so we had a lot of resources, and the marketing division was full on, and the salespeople knew what the different curriculums were going to be. Sort of nationwide, there's a lot of, consistency in what's taught in 5th grade or 4th grade or whatever. And so we knew that for the twist-a-plots, we just had to get the reading level right and topics that the kids would find intriguing. And then after that, it was I would look over the year and try to have a good balance so that we had a good mix of science and math and history, and sort of split it up between the issues so that one wasn't heavily weighted, in one area or another. So luckily, with the editors that were there on staff and the programmers who were, hugely instrumental in all of this, there was never a lack of ideas. And sometimes the hard thing was, what do we leave out? Because there are all these things that we want to do, and we can only do about 20 programs a year. And they also we were constrained by the limits of the machine and, how much we could fit on a disk and that kind of thing.
Do you know how many subscribers you had? At average or at peak, or just any sort of idea?
Goodness. I'm sure I knew at one point. I honestly don't know. I'd have to go back and I'd have to find that out for you. We had a lot. There was, I sort of did myself in. I had decided at one point that I wanted to have every kid get a personal response, and it was certainly easy enough for the kids that just wrote me out of the blue, but then we started doing these little monitor mysteries where they could write in and get a little certificate if they completed it. And I always tried to put in a little additional note. So it was fine because I absolutely adored my job and I loved everybody I worked with. But there were a couple of years there where I was working 7 days a week because I would come in on Saturday and Sunday and do nothing but answer letters. Wow. And, and even then, and after a while, we hired someone to sort of generate a form letter, but then we would always put personal notes on the bottom to the kids. And I just remember there were a lot of letters. So I'm embarrassed that I don't know the answer to that, but as I said, that's something I could probably find out for you.
If you can, that would be interesting to find out. But it's not the end of the world. Yeah. I was just curious if it was hundreds or thousands of subscribers. Yeah.
Oh, it was definitely thousands. I just don't know how many. It was definitely in the thousands because it was making money for us for a while, so that was great.
Well, you've led me right into another question. I was going to ask what feedback you got from students. It sounds like you got a lot of it. Can you tell me more about that?
We got a lot of, I think I would have to say, almost without exception, all the feedback from the kids was overwhelmingly positive. And they would ask for stuff, and they would ask, why can't you do this, or why can't you do something about that? They wanted Twist-a-Plots about dinosaurs, and they wanted, outer space and all that kind of stuff. Some of the teachers were more critical, which you would expect, and we always tried to listen to that. And when it came time to do an advisory board, I tried really hard to fill it with people that had made really critical but thoughtful comments, because I thought they could help us best to make it better. But the kids loved the Monitor the Monitor Mysteries a lot. They liked the Twist-a-Plots a lot. And anything that sort of smacked of a video game, of course, was really popular. We did a little program on light refraction, and we sort of took a play off of the game Pong, which I'm sure you're too young to remember, but I remember it, and it was this great game with a little ball bouncing back and forth, and we did it so that you would move a little device that would it was light coming from a flashlight, and if you moved the little barrier correctly, you could refract it back to hit a target. So that was pretty fun, because they thought they were playing a game, but there were also some good principles behind it. So that kind of stuff was usually a hit.
Well, tell me about can you give me some examples of the critical feedback from teachers? What were they upset about?
Oh, boy, this was so long ago. I'm trying to remember now. A lot of times it was that the programs didn't do enough, that they weren't powerful enough. And, I'm sure it sounded lame to them, but it was just a factor that, we had 64K or 128K. It was really little back then. And there really is only so much you can do, especially when you've got programs that are have a lot of graphics. Everything was so primitive back then. It took enormous amounts of space. And so we had to be careful and try to get in as much information, but also keep the kids engaged. So there was that. They said, this was kind of a puny program. It's like, we're really doing the best we can with the limits of the machine. Let's see. So there was that. I think that some of them felt that it wasn't scholarly enough, that a lot of it was sort of too much fun, and the earlier Twist-a-Plots were absolutely, just pure fiction, and after a few years, we got a couple of fabulous writers who were science writers as well as good fiction writers, and they would start to do things that the way that you move through the Twist-a-Plot was to read, comprehend what you were reading, answer some scientific questions, make some good guesses. So this woman whose name I suggested to you, Lorri Hopping, wrote one called Escape from Ant-Catraz, and you learned a lot about ants and their biology and, social cultures and everything to get through the story. So that was one response we did in reaction to feedback from teachers.
So was there a killer app in Microzine? What was the thing that you came out with that everyone was just like, yes, this is awesome? I think the Twist-a-Plots what was your Oregon Trail? I guess.
I don't think we had one. We had the Twist-a-Plots were hugely popular with the teachers as well. I think because they could see the value in the kids. It also took them a while to complete. So I think the teachers felt that if it's taking them this long to get through, and they're engaged, that's good, and they saw that as a positive. Scholastic Software had some real rock star standalone things like, oh my goodness, my friend programmed one. It was about math. It'll come to me. There was a math thing that was just a knockout, and Bang Street Writer was great. Point of View was great, but those are all like not Microzine.
I didn't realize you guys did Bank Street Writer. I thought that was Protobump.
It was Protobump, but Scholastic was affiliated with it in the early years. So there was some definite connection, and I think they published it in certain parts, and I would have to go back again and find out what the exact legal arrangement was, but it was sort of like Scholastic published the U.S. edition of Harry Potter. So, yes, it's J.K. Rowling, obviously, and her publisher, but Scholastic had the U.S. rights, and we had some affiliation with Bank Street Writer that was, of course, hugely popular. And then we went on to Success with Writing, which was, exclusively Scholastic. So, it all sort of evolved over a couple of years. But I think it was really the Twist-A-Plots that were just, the most popular. I wouldn't say that Microzine had a standalone Oregon Trail.
Was Steve Gass the man you were mentioning before who started off as editor before you came in?
No, that was Jeff Siegel. Steve Gass was in a more executive managerial area. He was absolutely the first wave, and I was only there for a little while before he went on, but he was part of that first team for sure.
Okay. There was a name that I saw I had in my notes, and I thought I'd find out where it went. And I got to say, I love on the Twist-A-Plots, at least some of them that I've seen, when you started off, it's just like, do you want to play as a boy or a girl? I'm like, that's awesome. There's something awesome about that.
Well, that also helped with the pronouns, too. But actually, that's so funny. I remember demoing that, but there was one, oh my God, it might have been Pirates of the Soft Seas or something, but you had to answer that, and then you got to type in your name, and I was sort of horsing around, and Jeff actually was with me there at that demo, and so I typed in that I was a boy, and then I typed in that my name was Sue, and I looked over at Jeff, and he's like, oh, my God, a boy named Sue. And he was like, so corny. But, the audience thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. So, but, tried to make it fun for the kids, that they could fool around with it a little bit and still get their work done.
Right.
So.
Well, I had read something about the Choose Your Own Adventure books that when they come out, they learned early on that a girl would read a book with a boy protagonist, but a boy wouldn't read a book with a girl protagonist. So, but on the computer
I believe
platform,
that. Yep.
On the computer platform, you could play it any way you wanted to. So.
Exactly.
And
the other thing, too, with those Twist-A-Plots at the beginning was another change that we made was in the beginning you could sort of, there were multiple endings. And as you can imagine, that's kind of complicated to structure that and map it out so that all of the stories make sense. But we decided, pretty quickly that it really made, especially when you're, introducing the curriculum and stuff, you want them to succeed by making, the correct science decisions or the correct decisions based on what they've read. So we tried to have lots of branches, but we tried to have basically one ending. So that's another reason why they got a lot longer. We wanted to make it more challenging.
So I know you were responsible for a lot of content in there besides the Twist-A-Plots, the articles and things. Can you tell me a little bit about creating that stuff?
Sure. Some of it, again, there was a lot of input from lots of folks. We originally worked with a group out in Minnesota, a team of developers, and they were fabulous. And they had lots of ideas, but then once the editors sort of got their hands on it, lots of people were suggesting ideas and coming up with things. And so I would try to sketch out for the year, the curriculum areas, and we would try to find ideas that we could make fit into those slots. And, how can you take the idea of light refraction, and you get science, but then how can you make it fun? And so a lot of stuff, just a lot of freewheeling ideas and a lot of late nights, and then some of the editors would say, I want this to be entirely mine, and I'm going to go off and create this whole thing and come back and run it by you. So one of them was, it was almost like a Rube Goldberg device where you had to go from one side of the screen to the other, but you had to know a sequence of events, and if you press the toaster down, the toaster flies up and the bird is flying over right at that same moment, and the bird picks up the toast and drags, that kind of thing. It was, just sort of piling ideas in there, and some people would take ownership of it and go off and develop it, and then we might tweak it. And then a lot of times the graphic artists would come up with fabulous ideas too. And this one woman was sort of, Loretta Jones was kind of a pioneer back in the day for these graphics, and realized that, and this shows you how primitive it was, the graphics would come up and they would be essentially drawn on the screen in the same sequence that the artist created it. And she realized that she could use that to her advantage. So when they did a twisted plot called Fossils Alive, it came up as a dinosaur skeleton, but then it sort of came to life based on the order in which she drew the skin and the features of the dinosaur. So it looked like it was sort of emerging. And that was just taking advantage of what the technology was at the time. But it's basically what games and what things we thought were fun, that we could say, well, can we hang a math hat on this somehow? Because then we could do this with coins or something, and we, we're all obviously all playing games on our own, and coming in and playing games from competitors and stuff, and just really sort of getting loosened up for the day and getting all excited about doing stuff that we really loved. Mm-hmm. So it was a good time in my life too. My career, it was a really fun time. It was a very, very lively group there.
That's great. Awesome. So Microzine was supposed to be from grades 4 to 6. And then at some point you guys came out with Microzine Junior, which I believe was kindergarten through 4th.
Yeah. I thought that was a little bit too wide a range, but, that's a marketing decision. Mm. I would have loved to have pulled it down to K1-2, or maybe 1-2-3. For what the kids are able to do, it was awfully wide range. But it was fun because, we got to try different things and again, step back on those twisted plots and get the reading level down and the number of decisions down and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what got me into this is I had read something in an old magazine saying that there was Microzine for the Atari, and it seems like some clarification from you. Either it never came out for the Atari, or it was only out for a little while when you guys decided Apple's would
I think it was just one issue, quite frankly. I think it was just one issue, and it was that crazy parallelogram box. Or rhombus-shaped box. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I've seen pictures.
Which was quickly discarded. The box that wouldn't fit on any shelf. That there was a lot of feedback on that. You can imagine. What the hell am I supposed to do with this box? I can't put it on a shelf. It flies off. I think it came out for one issue on the Atari. It was like they had an interview with the older brother from E.T. and something, and that was also, that idea was quickly discarded because, boy, that gets out of date before it's even published. The kids have long moved on by the time that comes out. Yeah. So I was so sorry. You said you're doing this podcast for Atari, and it's like I don't have that much to offer you, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm doing a favor for my Apple brethren. It's okay. We're all 65 okay. Friends in 6502. It's all right.
All right.
So yeah, you said it was stuff went out of date. What was the lead time on production?
That was one of the hardest things. Well, let's see. We did 5 issues a year. We were at least 2 months. It was usually more like 4 was safer because, you had to create this stuff, but then you had to test it rigorously because, this stuff's going into the schools, and especially at the beginning, teachers had to be convinced that they wanted this and needed it, and they were so certain that it was going to be a problem and it was going to be buggy, and we just decided that we were going to create something that, one, the kids could totally use on their own. So the documentation was pretty light, because there's a lot of documentation built into the actual programs, which they could get just by pressing a question mark, and you'd get a help screen of whatever you're doing at that moment. But we also had to test it rigorously, and we hired a lot of local kids, high school kids, to come in and bang on those programs, and they were triumphant when they could make it crash. And of course, we insisted that they write a very detailed report on what the heck did you do to make this crash, and then we would take it back to our office to try to recreate it, and then we would go back to the programmers and work on that. So that probably took the longest, and then of course you need the time to produce these things and produce these discs and get them packaged. So if I'm remembering correctly, there were some times where we skated pretty close to the edge and was 2 months lead time. It was more like 4 was better because that meant that, you weren't having hysterics to get it done. But, 5 discs during the school year is a lot. And that meant that you always had something in different stages of production. I had a big wall in my office, and we had the status of every program. It was like a war board or something where was each piece? Was it with the developer? Is it with the programmer? Is it with this editor? Is it in testing? So we could keep it moving through.
So some of the Microzine features were later compiled into themed bundles. For example,
right.
Haunted House and Mystery Pinecrest Manor were reissued as Tales of Mystery. Do you know if many of those bundles were released, and was there any reason other than marketing and have another thing to sell, or?
That's why. It was a way to reach another market, so that if a teacher, there was almost more too for the labs if the kids didn't have a lot of time, and they could come in and pick up sort of a twofer. And so we tried to bundle them in subject areas or interest areas that, if a kid likes this mystery, maybe they want to just do 2 mysteries for the afternoon or something. It was the marketing. It was a way to take the stuff. It was very expensive to produce this stuff, and how to get the most bang out of it, all of this effort and all of these months of, this huge team of people to see if we could bundle it and sell it just in a different way and maybe increase the market a little bit.
So some of the later, going back to Twisted Plot for just a minute, the later Twisted Plot stories moved from a choose-your-own-adventure format to more of a computer text adventure format with players entering command. What prompted that change?
Well, I guess it was more of an editorial thing. We just felt like, it was 2 things. One is an editorial thing. You feel like if you're telling a story, you're telling a story, not multiple stories. It just felt if you had 5 legitimate endings to a story, that maybe the story was weaker than, from a plot point of view, than one story that was moving ahead to one outcome. And the other thing was, adding these curriculum aspects. If you're trying to have the kids learn something, remember something, make some good guesses based on what they've read, you're kind of directing them in a way to the ending. And so when we went from that multiple ending format, and it happened pretty quickly, to the one ending, they got a lot longer and more complex so that the kids would feel that they had accomplished something by the time they got all the way through it, and that it was worth going back and making a couple of attempts to get it right.
So you mentioned earlier you play some of the games and things from the competition, and I'm curious about what from other sources was your inspiration. What things did you borrow or steal from? What ways did you find that were different from the leading brand?
Yeah, there was my husband and I, we were dating at that point, but he was a graphic designer at Scholastic. He and I were complete fans of text adventures, and he used to play those a lot. And of course, there's no imagery on those; it was all text. And that sort of, I liked the idea of that. And of course, we've been doing Twisted Plots where full screen graphics would come up, but then we did a couple where you'd have a much more primitive graphic, but it would be the top half of the screen, and then you'd have a lengthy caption underneath. So that was, in a way, sort of blending the two ideas, where you could move from room to room, and the text would change accordingly, and the challenges would change accordingly. So that was just one sort of small subset of the Twisted Plots. I was also, we're huge fans of Lode Runner, and so the complete obsession with that, and I'm trying to think which one that sort of prompted. There was Lode Runner, and Tetris was a big one, and we didn't really figure that one out. We're trying to figure out how could we do spatial relations and shapes and things like that. That was more in a Microzine Junior thing where they were playing with shapes and things, and of course we did a much more elementary. It wasn't like Falling Dead. It wasn't like a video game thing, but we got the idea of, let's do something with shapes and colors that they could do. A lot of it was just, you sort of come in and you just sort of play a game for 30 minutes, and then you feel like you're ready to go to work. So we would do stuff like that and try to have our bosses understand we're actually working.
It's research.
Yeah. But it was more to just sort of get warmed up and into it, It's I think the thing that would have been a killer is if we'd gotten bored at that whole idea. If you're getting bored, you're not going to come up with anything fun for the kids. So it was more like that, just sort of. I guess it was the text adventures that I was thinking of when I mentioned that to you, that I was just trying to think of how I can combine a lot of text on the screen, from a kid's point of view, a lot of text, and a little minimal graphic that sort of keeps them intrigued and moving from point to point.
What haven't I asked you yet that I should have?
About developing it, or...
About the whole experience, about any of it.
About the whole experience.
I bet you have a story that you haven't told me.
I wish that it had been, or we had figured out, or I had figured out a way to make it less expensive to produce, because I think it was such a great idea, and we didn't run out of ideas for programs. So I wish there were a way that we could have kept advancing with the software and the machines and everything, and to keep it going, because I think it was great for its time, and I wish it could have continued. The developers, when we went from you're going to laugh at this, when we went from the Apple II Plus to the 2C, those guys were ecstatic, and I remember because there was so much more we could do. I mean, there was all this energy, and I remember one guy saying, that Apple II Plus is a Ford, and this 2C is a Ferrari. He was like so excited about that, and so I wish we could have kept it going to what's going on now. My kids have. They sort of look back on what we did, and they sort of roll their eyes and go, like, really? And I said, you don't understand. Back in the day, this was really cool. And your mother was at the forefront of this stuff. We were all these great people, and we really felt like we were making this big difference in the schools, and having the teachers welcome it and the parents maybe not so alarmed, and have the kids engaged. So the other thing that was nice about that, that I don't think I talked about was we did a lot of school visits where we took software in development into the schools, and I always paired up an editor with one of the programmers, and they went out as a team. And I think that benefited the product a lot because the programmers had this incredible skill. They were so brilliant at what they did, but to see it in use with not someone as skilled as they were, a 10-year-old kid or an 8-year-old kid, and to see what they could and couldn't do was a real eye-opener for them, and I think the product benefited because I think they came back with a better understanding of who their actual audience. I mean, the kids weren't our customers, but they were our audience. So we wanted this to be for them, and of course the editors got a big snootful of what was and wasn't working as far as how the program was designed, something that seems so clear to you. And then you go and you watch somebody else try to understand your directions on the screen or something, and they're not getting it. It's that was important too. So I'm kind of all over the place here. I guess I wish that there was something like this that came out periodically for kids in schools. I just think it would be really fun. The trouble is that things change so quickly now, and the technology changes so fast that I'm not sure that a publishing company would be able to keep up with it.
Yeah, it's going to be now an iPad app that's good for a few months, and that would be, I don't know.
Yeah, and then it's gone, and you just invest enormous resources in terms of money and time and people to get something good, and if you can't sell it for very long, that's you're not going to be able to do it. So,
right.
Anyway.
So why did Microzine come to an end?
I think that the market it just wasn't making enough money, quite frankly. I think the market got a little bit saturated and it just got too expensive, and Scholastic software was in full swing then, and I think that they wanted to devote more time to different products and one-off products, which would stay for a couple of years, and it was absolutely, I think, one of the more expensive items to produce. So I think they felt that we'd had a good run, and it was time for them to move on.
Yeah, it did have a good run. It was 9 years or almost 9 years.
I know. We're proud of that.
Yeah.
So I'm still in touch with a lot of these folks, and a lot of these authors and things, people who write for kids, they never go away. They're always doing stuff, and they're always on to the next thing. And, this one woman, Lorri Hopping, is now designing ESL games. She's living in Michigan and just doing incredible stuff and designing stuff for adults and kids because she's a game designer. And just and she worked on, I think it was Science World, Scholastic, that magazine, which was a great magazine, and sort of took all those skills and just took it to the next event.
Nice. Well, I hope to talk with her soon.
Yeah, she's fascinating. She's a good person.
So I just got back a couple of weeks ago from KansasFest, which is an annual conference of Apple II devotees. And there were 70 people there. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and people there, hacking on all Apple IIs. I just want you to know that people remember Microzine and talk fondly of it, and there's some.
So nice to hear. That's really lovely to hear. I was reaching out to Jeff Siegel, and he's wrapped up in a bunch of stuff, and he couldn't talk to you, but he commented on it. He said, it's so incredibly great to hear that something that we worked on so hard and cared a lot about, that people liked it and remembered it. So that's really nice.
I'd like to ask you if you could send a message to those grown-ups who were kids using Microzine back in the day, and you can send them a message right now, what would you tell them?
That I hope that they're still really excited about trying new things, whether it's on the computer or anywhere else, that I hope they still have all that energy and enthusiasm that makes them actually pick up a pencil in right to somebody who's working on it, because we get as excited about it as they do. So I just hope the energy and excitement's still there.
I think that's all I have. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, well, that's great. I hope it was helpful. It was lovely to talk to you.
Actually, before we start, I just wanted to show you from my archives. Can you see?
I can, yeah.
Microzine Junior.
Nice.
There's a microzine. These are some of the ones that I wrote. I have a couple that I wrote that I no longer have the floppy disks. Whether they're good or not, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But these are still shrink wrapped, so I just put them in the archive, and you reminded me I still had them. So
sweet. I know a guy who's because those things were copy protected, and so some of them are out there now, and some of them are not. And I know a guy who goes in there and breaks the copy protection on things like Microzine and makes them available because
I found Escape from Alcatraz. I found an emulator, and I found it online. I thought it was great. I think it's cool because nobody's selling it, nobody can use them anymore. So
right.
Getting them out there is a thrill for somebody who's participating in the creative process anyway. Can't talk for the business end.
Right. How'd you get started at Scholastic?
Well, I started out on just fresh out of college at a new startup magazine called Electronic Learning, very, very first magazine there about when PCs first came out. So this was 1982. Mm-hmm. And so classrooms and schools were just getting their very first PCs. We had TRS-80s. We had, that was the main machine, actually. We had the Radio Shack was kind of dominating for that short period of time. And I had never seen a PC before. And they put me on the staff of this as a gopher, as a reporter, as an editorial assistant for the summer. And I had to learn computers 101 from scratch. I was a liberal arts major, English and French literature. So this was not completely unhappy with math. I like math a lot, but I had no experience with computers. So that led to the job with Teaching in Computers, another spin-off magazine for teachers where I learned basic programming. And that was back in the day when you wrote basic programs, you typed them, and then you had to convert them for all the different machines, and then you printed them in the magazine. And teachers would laboriously type letter for letter and hope they got all the semicolons in place, because my goodness, if you missed a semicolon, the program didn't work. And so I wrote that was like a 1 or 2 year period before the software came out, before the software really blossomed, and teachers were just clamoring for material and programs. So basic programming gave way to program on floppy disks, right? So everybody started doing floppy disk, and so Scholastic started a software division. I think it was the mid-'80s. I could be corrected on that. Amy would know better because she ended up heading the editorial there. And they tapped me because nobody knew how to do this stuff. Nobody knew computers. Nobody understood user response. Nobody understood, that your viewer is a character. And so they hired a lot of writers to do these who, we were all sort of pioneering and struggling through this new medium. But because I had done a lot of choose your own adventure kind of stuff and, the old books and understood how the basic programming logic worked and understood this, the if-then loops and the, conditional clauses, I went to town with it. I loved it. I loved my very first video game script that I wrote, this Escape from Alcatraz, launched me in this whole new direction, whole new career, whole new way of thinking of story, relating to the user, having a dialogue with the user, anticipating what they're going to do. Really, really some of the most difficult kind of writing to do. And for me, that was fun and a challenge. So I wrote, in the period when Microzine was around, I think it lasted, 4 or 5 years. It was a sweet spot where you could be a writer on a video game, and they would hire the writers first, and then the artists, and then the coders, and that all got flopped around when the graphics took over, and we went into the CD-ROM era. And so, for Microzine, the way it worked is, there were no protocols. Nobody knew how to do this. There was no best practices. People were doing it all different kinds of ways. I literally wrote almost like a movie script, with hyperlinks, embedded in text to tell where to go if the user presses this and that. And that works when you have a 64K machine and, your graphics are, mostly static. I think somewhere in the middle, of that, they introduced 2-part animation. That was a big thing. Oh, we can do 2-part animation now. We have room, we have space, which means my ant antenna could go like that and then that. 2 parts. You can move different ways, and that was big breakthrough for the graphics, in this game. So really, like I said, a very interesting time to be a writer, because it was a golden era to be a writer for video games. There was no training, no degrees in that. It was Wild West. It was wide open.
Yeah. So did your method for creating them change over time, or did you stick to the thing that you just described with making a kind of a hyperlinked outline?
Well, the industry changed drastically, and I mean dramatically. The last of the floppy disks, and when the graphics came in the CD-ROM era, I did a lot of CD-ROM work for Microsoft and Edmark and IBM and Scholastic, Magic School Bus, and things like that. Very, very much more of a team approach, and very much more led by art and design, interactive design, so that the writing almost came later. Writing almost came as text filler in some ways in some of those games. And the visuals and the interactives became really the storytelling engines in the CD-ROM era, and for good reason. I mean, really, it's video. They're video games. It really is a visual medium, and it also is the strength of the medium is interactive. The strength of the medium is that dialogue with the user, and that really needs to be nailed. I think. Primo, first, you have to define your character and define your relationship with your user first before you write anything. And scripting is still changing. It's still morphing and evolving, video game scripting, I think, in a lot of different ways. The last couple of projects I've worked on, have all been different. The writing process has been really, really different. I'm on what's more of a digital novel right now. More story than game. There's interactives, but I'm actually the narrative designer, and there's a separate lead writer who's just doing text, and then there's a coder artist who's basically scripting in game. So you want to go look in the game, you want to be in the game and say, what's going to happen here? Do we need any text? What do we do here? So it's gone completely in game, and it's gone very visual. There's the if-then conditional loops are all done visually now, so that even I can follow what's going to happen on the game states as you're writing. So that's been a huge change. That's what I'm working on right now. It's called Inanimate Alice.
Awesome. So before it sounded like it was super story-driven. That was, the story was everything, and you had to work around that. What kind of constraints did you have to creativity? What constraints did you have to work around creatively? It was the Wild West. I'm just going to say, even for an educational product, we had curriculum, we had a topic. All these Microzine games and programs were learning. There was for a school audience and a home audience, but really education came first. So the biggest constraint was a conventional one. It had to teach kids certain things, and it still had to be fun. And that's still a challenge. That's still the big challenge in educational publishing in almost any medium. So I think that was it. The technical challenge really was the memory, really was the computer memory, really restrictive. And as a writer, you want to expand and do this and have this happen and go over here. And really, in a very compact way, you had to think about graphics economically. So one of the programs I wrote, twisted my brain around this, was called Safari, where because the graphics were so limited, I set the whole thing in one place. So you're in one Safari location, but you play as 6 different animals. So even though you go into the setting 6 different times, you can play the game 6 different times. If you're a different animal, you're going to have different experiences and different reactions. You're either a predator or prey. You have to find certain food. There's going to be a certain adventure, but the graphics stayed static, essentially. And it allowed a lot more of other things to happen in that, so that you had a lot more room in the code to do other things by keeping the graphics simple. So that was one solution. Wouldn't have to do that these days. These days you could take each animal on infinite procedurally generated worlds of adventure and endless safari if you wanted to. And so that was definitely a constraint. Was during the 80s. I think by the 90s that loosened up. So you did Alcatraz, you did Safari. What other games did you do for Microzine?
I did Quest for the Pole, which was a lot of fun. Now, this was interesting because Quest for the Pole was based on nonfiction, based on a true story, the Franklin expedition in the Arctic. And so I did a lot of research and did a lot of kind of fact-checking on this, but it's still a branching adventure story. It's still a survival story. Do this, you die. Do this, you don't. It's pretty classic branching text adventure. And because it was based on a true story, and I wasn't making stuff up, I mean, the endings were essentially real. You learned a lot about sled dogs and things like that. It was just kind of a departure because Alcatraz was similar in the way that you were learning about ants and it was fact-based, but the adventure itself was really science fiction because you're not really an ant. You're not really trapped inside of an anthill. Whereas Quest for the Pole was pretty good, straightforward adventure.
And what else did you work on?
Yeah, that's right. I almost forgot. I did the Balloonatics, which was sort of a Jules Verne, 80 days around in the balloon, but it was a language arts adventure, and so you're just going in this balloon to these different locations and with a learning game embedded in it. So kind of the text was really, the whole adventure was just a structure to get you to practice your grammar and your language, and it's for younger children. So Microzine Junior, the junior version I'm looking at now is from ages 6 to 8, and the older version was 9 and up. So,
did you ever get pushback from editors or saying this needs to be more educational, or this isn't? It's super educational, but it's not fun, or how'd you find that balance? And did you have to argue with people about it?
Well, that would be Amy, one of my favorite editors on the planet. No, she was great to work, really, really great to work with. And Scholastic is one of the biggest educational publishers in the world, and so they're able to attract a lot of really top-level, skilled people at doing that. That's what they do. They understand the audience, they understand the kids, and Amy in particular was really, really good about letting me shape the story. With Alcatraz, with the first one I wrote in particular, I just had a topic. She just gave me the topic, and I remember sitting there, well, you want to be inside the anthill, but then what happens? And I remember completely inventing every little chamber that you went to, every little section that you went to, all the choices that you made, and as long as the science was solid, as long as the ants acted the way they were supposed to, in the sense of, scientifically, if they were this kind of ant, they were going to behave this way. It was okay that they talked. Even though this was science, can we get talking ants? So there was some discussion about that. There's scientists who rebel a little bit about anthropomorphizing, but it's an adventure game. It's an adventure story, and the fun really came from the personalities of the ants. I had Arnolda, the soldier, was really strong from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I just had some really corny stuff in there that they left in there. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. Did you get any feedback from students and teachers?
I don't remember getting a lot. I wasn't on that end of it. Amy would know for sure because I know they did a lot of testing, and they certainly the marketing people would tell you exactly what that is. But as I think I mentioned to you a couple of years ago, somebody contacted me who was a Microzine fan, and the Microzine kids are grown up now. Anybody who had this program or remembers it, this was 30 years ago, right? Am I right? Almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
They're now parents, right? So, some of these programs and games were the things that they remember doing as kids, and there's a sweet spot, I think, when you're 8 to about 12, the things that you do at that age become magical, and when you become an adult, that's what you look back to, like that's what trading baseball cards, or whether it's collecting figurines, or, Beanie Babies, or whatever it was you did from 8 to 12 in that sweet spot. I think you end up with a fondness and a nostalgia for that I think is really sweet and does come back to me every once in a while. On Twitter, somebody contacted me, had found Alcatraz and said, "Oh my gosh, you're the Alcatraz lady." And the guy's again in his 30s or 40s, they're somewhere up there. And it's kind of fun. It's really a fun part of having stuff out there, even if it's not on floppy disk and not streaming.
Right.
Did you play Microzine? This was something that you remember?
I had seen it, but I was an Atari kid, and my school had TRS-80s for some reason, not Apples, like every other school in the world. So I was certainly aware of it, but no, I wasn't. I somehow missed it. But okay, so I just go to this. I go to this annual conference of Apple II users, and it's called KansasFest, and this year 70 people were there, who were people really into the Apple II, and people talk about Microzine. It's like one of those. You can be walking through the hallways and people just talking about it, or showing off, or talking about Twist-A-Plots and things. So I think there's so many people who remember it and use the magazine and enjoyed the Twist-A-Plots. So I got this piqued my interest because I saw there was an Atari version, and then Amy said that they published one Atari edition, and then they decided to go straight Apple. So
that's where you heard about it. Well, I didn't know about the Apple II convention. That's interesting. I'm going to check that out.
It's called KansasFest, and it's a lot of fun.
I'm going to check that out because it's a trip down memory lane for me. I mean, when we were creating these things, we had no idea at the time how this whole industry would take off. The promise was there, and certainly you saw computers were going to take over. No, I don't think anybody would have disputed that, when the PCs first came on the scene. But it's now bigger than movies. The video game industry is now bigger than movies, and it's one of the mainstream mediums now for communication and storytelling. And to see the innovation over the last 30 years has just been unbelievable for me. I mean, my career essentially spans that. I mean, 1982 up till now. That's it. That's the tech innovation era for this kind of thing. So that's just keeping up with it's been a little tough. But.
Yeah, it was faster now than it did then, and it was fast then. So, what other magazines, computer magazines, did you work on? Did we talk about them all?
I just did the two. I started my career in those two magazines. I worked there for 4 years, and then I freelanced. Then I went freelance and worked for all the other Scholastic magazines, which were classroom magazines, and I worked for the software division. I worked for a little bit for the television division there. So basically my career is more of a writer, and the computer thing was, I'm not going to say foisted on me because I loved it. Nobody wanted to do it. If you graduate with an English degree and they say, oh, you're going to work in a computer magazine, that's a really tough fit, especially back then when nobody was using computers regularly. They were all new and different. And so I think I kind of fell into that a little bit, and a little bit luckily so, because it was, like I said, it was a very golden era. And now you pretty much have to be a tech head to get a job on any kind of computer magazine, and I certainly wasn't at the time. So the computer thing really, I ended up editing a science magazine because they thought, well, computers, you must know science. I'm like, well, okay. I can figure out computers, I can figure out science, right? And that launched a whole science writing career. So I've done a lot of science books. I edited a math magazine, same reason. Oh, you've done computers, why don't you edit our math magazine? I'm like, okay, I did a few issues of that. And so I ended up in these STEM fields kind of walking backwards. They kind of just kept pulling me into these topics, which I ended up. I made a really good career in science writing. I love science now. I didn't when I first started out, and I really, really love science. And so that ended up being probably the most thing I've written about is science. And now, like I said, today I'm back to fiction. So back into my sweet spot, which was my literature major. Finally back to fiction.
Nice. So this will be listened to by dozens or perhaps hundreds of people who used Microzine and played your Twisted Plot games. You can send them a message right now. What would you say to them?
Oh, I would say thank you. I would love to hear your memories because it's been so long. I mean, and like you said, I really didn't get a lot of direct feedback, and I really would also like to know what people are playing now, where that led to. All those things that we created, a lot of the things that we were pioneering in the very early 80s, probably up to 88, 89, I see now iterated out there in different forms, like grow your plants and take care of them. We had a program like that. We had a game like that at Scholastic, and now it's like Farmville, right? So I'm really, really curious about that, about the evolution. So if people are Microzine fans and something in there, they're still on that same track that set them on some kind of a beloved, kind of programming or game that they love, I would love to hear that, especially still being in the industry. What resonates, what works.
Great. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet that I should have?
Gosh, I can't think of anything. I think, too, if you get a chance to talk to some of the other writers, I just want to say that Amy, I can't speak highly enough of Amy because she really was and is my favorite editor on the planet for pioneering a lot of this, worked with a lot of talent. Like, Scholastic can draw some talent, and some of the other writers are super, super proud and a little intimidated to be on the same plane with them at the time. I was in my 20s, and they brought in some heavy hitters. They brought in some authors and some people who had to adjust to the medium. Really, I can remember reading a piece about William Faulkner trying to write a screenplay, and what a disaster, because it was like you have to have little tiny, dialogue and sentences, and it really is a different way of thinking about story. And I think that was an interesting challenge, an interesting puzzle, and I never look back. That's my career now. That's the number one thing I like to do is interactive writing. And other people, it was went back to novels, and I get the text and immersion in the story. So that would be an interesting conversation to see where the other writers ended up. If they stuck with it or went back, to other media, what they did.
I have what I need. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, good to talk to you, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, so thank you again, Kevin. Those were wonderful. I assume we haven't actually heard them yet. We're waiting for him to little breaking the fourth wall here, but we're waiting for him to send us the audio as we record this. So hopefully it isn't just the Microzine folks going, God, those Apple guys really suck.
Yeah, that's very, very professional of us there. Yeah, I'm sure they were great because Kevin's great, great interviewer. All right, let's roll into some news, shall we?
It's, can't be worse than this.
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
So speaking of interviews that we didn't do, but we're going to talk about anyway, Chris Torrance over on YouTube. He has been doing a bang-up job there. He's got a podcast. That's not the right word. I don't know. YouTube channel, Tube Vlog, Tubecast. I don't know. Those things have a name that I don't know because I'm
Cast 2 Pod.
Yeah, I'm not a millennial, so I don't know what you call those things. But he's been doing everything from hardware demos to software demonstrations, and recently, he's got a really great interview with Doug Carlston of Broderbund fame, and it's really, really a great watch. I recommend it.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff there, and I know that Jimmy Marr has also done a lot of interviewing of Doug for his digital antiquarian blog that we highly, highly recommend over at feelfree.net. We'll have the link in the show notes, of course, and we also appreciate that Doug that Chris hooked us up with Doug for a possible interview in the future. I think we'll let that one percolate for a little while because Chris and Jimmy have done such a wonderful job of covering everything. I don't know, one, if there's anything left that needs to be talked about, and two, it's, 3 in a row like that is maybe it's good to let it wait for a while.
Yeah, maybe listeners want to let us know at feedback@open-apple.net if you want us to interview Doug here on the show right now, or wait a little bit, or give us your feedback.
Yep.
All right, moving along, we've got some kind of a surge, is a weird word, but surge of cool new 2GS hardware. And
what a pun!
Yeah. Oh yeah, I see. Oh yeah, I see what I did there, and I didn't even realize it. So the first thing that we've got is the 4-play joystick card. Now this is really cool. This is from Lukazi, who is based out of Australia, that we've talked about here quite a bit on the show in the past. He's got a really cool blog where he does Apple II hacking projects, and he's got a legit product now called the 4-play, and it allows you to connect 4 game controllers to your 2GS. And what's cool about this is the range of controllers it supports. Everything from the classic Atari joysticks to all sorts of Amiga and Commodore and various other sorts of things. Obviously anything that was, Atari joystick compatible like the C64 was, but also some actually kind of weird stuff. He's talking about also possibly Sega Genesis controller compatibility and lots of stuff. And if that's not enough, usually with a gadget like this, you're like, well, that's neat, but there's no software that supports it. Well, guess what? Kaboom, the recent release from Antoine Vigneault, has been upgraded to support the 4-play, which is certainly the best possible way to play this game. So, being a 4-player game, cramming people around your 2GS keyboard is definitely not the way to go, as the Atari folks like to point out. So this really looks like a fun way to play it.
Yeah, I'm excited to check this out. Now, Alex Lukazi, of course, he's come to KansasFest at least once. He had that amazing turtle robot that he had plugged in and did a joystick, an Atari joystick to Apple II thing. It was like a prototype that he wired up really quickly, actually, just there at KansasFest. So, which I think sort of applies to our next item, doesn't it? Or no, that was just what we talked about.
We're really firing on all cylinders this morning.
Yeah.
It's been a strange weekend, folks. But yeah, well, they both start with 4s, so the confusion is understandable. The next product is from, I think, a newcomer to the hardware scene on the Apple II, someone called Manila Gear. I can't find any other reference to them, so this might be their first product. But it's the 4-sonic quadraphonic sound card. Now, the 2GS sound chip, the Ansonic, as we all know, is quite a masterpiece. And it has some rather strange hidden properties that a lot of people don't know about, one of which is most people know the 2GS had mono output, but was capable of stereo with a fairly simple add-on card, such as the Sonic Blaster. But actually, the Ensoniq had 8 channels. That's not to be confused with oscillators, of which it had 32, and voices, of which it had 16, typically, depending how you combine the oscillators. But it also was capable of 8 separate channels. Maddeningly, I have no idea why they would have engineered it to that degree, but it was capable of 8 channel surround sound. So, which of course never got used. But this card allows you to unlock 4 channels, quadraphonic, hence the name. And in fact, apparently, according to the documentation, can be combined with a second card to get all 8 channels, which is fairly astonishing. I don't know what you would do with that, but well, I guess speaking of what you would do with that, once again, Kaboom has been modified to support this thing. So it must be quite the audio-visual feast with 4 joysticks and quadraphonic sound on the 2GS, playing what's already a really terrific game. And possibly my favorite or most interesting feature of this thing is apparently it can be configured to run without using a slot. Now, I haven't been able to find much more for that on details for that, but this thing is, I think, shipping soon. Is that right, Mike? It's not quite available yet?
Yeah, it was demoed actually at WASFest down in Down Under, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but no, it's not available for general purpose yet.
Okay, cool.
General purchase yet.
We'll have a link in the show notes to Manila Gear's site where there's some photos of the prototype and other cool information about it. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how it works without using a slot. That's really cool. Yeah,
so as I mentioned, these 2 cards were demoed down at WASFest 3, and it's easy, especially from an unknown company, and from no offense to any Filipino listeners we might have, but you hear from some new product from somebody you've never heard of in the Philippines, and maybe that's real, maybe that's going to be another vaporware product. But fortunately, this thing appears to be very real. So yeah, looking forward to playing with both of these actually.
Yeah, and we'll have a link to the demo of it at WASFest as well. So very cool stuff coming down the pipe. All right, the next thing, something I came across on Hackaday, VCF East was run recently, as many of our listeners no doubt know. In fact, some of you were probably there. And they have something they call the Hackathon, which is much like the Hackfest at KFest. And what was cool about this is, so the part of Hackathon this year is they had set up a bunch of Commodore 64s, boo, and Apple IIs, yay. And they had set them all up with just AppleSoft Basic, and they challenged people to come and just sit down and do something cool in Basic. And it was mostly people who, maybe they'd written some Basic 30 years ago or whatever, but hadn't since. And so they just had, the manuals there, and they told people to just go nuts and see what you can write in whatever, an hour or 2 hours or whatever. So there's, really cool pictures over on Hackaday of people banging away on AppleSoft Basic for the first time in probably 30 years and trying to make something cool out of it. So kind of like a 10-line Basic challenge or something like that, but in real time. That was something that we used to do a lot of back in the day, actually. I cut my teeth on programming competitions back in junior high and high school. They had this exact kind of format where you had a bunch of challenges you had to solve and a time limit, and there was judges making sure you weren't cheating with extra books or whatever. So this brings back lots of memories for me.
Yeah, I really like the idea of doing these little contests, on site only, just at the convention. It starts when you get there, it's done before you leave, and it really, I think, fosters a sense of community and competition and creativity. Inevitably, invariably, at least at KansasFest, we always get some great products as a result of the Hackfest. Even the stuff that doesn't get finished and isn't judged usually ends up leading to something that gets released at some point. So good on you, VCF.
Yeah, and what I like about that format is it kind of levels the playing field and makes it more fun for everybody, because if you've got an offline competition where it's like, okay, bring something to the show that you worked on for the past year and we'll judge that. Well, there's always going to be someone who has more free time than you and can dedicate, 50 hours a week to it. Meanwhile, you've got a job and kids or whatever, so you can't do that. Whereas this is like, okay, we're all just here for an hour or 2 hours, and we're starting from the same place, and let's just see what happens. So yeah, I think that's really cool. And yeah, especially with AppleSoft Basic, where it's such a low barrier to entry, and it's fun and easy to get something on the screen.
Sure.
All right, speaking of mainstream blogs that don't usually run Apple II stuff. Wow, that segue was awful. Over on Boing Boing, they had a quick rundown. They did kind of a tribute to 1980s video game box art. Of course, one of the defining characteristics of early video games was that, well, A, they had boxes, which games no longer do, and B, the actual game graphics were usually not good enough to show on the box. So they didn't want you to necessarily see what the game actually looked like. So they had to show you something that would stoke your imagination instead. And they did that often with watercolor or oil paintings or other types of illustration on the fronts of the box. And some of it was really quite amazing, and some of it was really quite terrible, and most of it was somewhere in the middle. Lots of naked ladies in, bronze bikinis and things. But the reason I mention it here on the show is that this sort of collection of 1980s box art is actually mostly Serious Software, who, of course, was an amazing publisher of Apple II stuff. They did a lot of really great stuff. And they were known for really interesting box art. So there's lots of fantastic shots of Serious Software's box art, which, if you're like me, most of which you'd never seen because you pirated all those games, so you never saw the boxes for them. Yeah, I have to say, Serious Presents Plasmania. I'll never get that phrase out of my head. That little speech synthesis that they did. Oh my
goodness, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Take a look if you're feeling nostalgic for sometimes cheesy and sometimes awesome 1980s video game box art.
Yeah, and in fact, that awesome artwork wasn't just restricted to game boxes. It was also, Byte magazine, especially those early copies. For a long time, the art was the cover art were things to be, had, and I knew people would cut them out and frame them and put them on their walls. And Byte, in fact, I think sold a number of prints from, I forget the artist's name. He did the covers, I think, for 20 or more years, and those prints are very expensive now. And recently I'd been going through some old soft talks and even Byte magazine, and I'd been scanning in game ads, and I got access to a large format plotter at work. And so at night when nobody else is looking, I've been printing those out as posters. But just seeing that, like you said, seeing the box art and being able to actually sit and appreciate it rather than walking past it in the aisle at Egghead Software because I have the pirated copy at home. It's really neat to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the ads too, because Chris Torrance actually in that very same interview that we mentioned earlier talks a little bit about the different types of ad artwork that these companies used, and it was definitely a defining characteristic of the company. You could sort of tell, much like today, you can tell how serious or how big a company is by the quality of their website. You could tell how serious or big a company was by the quality of their artwork, and some of it is literally pencil drawings by, the programmer, and that's the advertisement in a glossy magazine, as opposed to other companies, which like Broderbund, who are early on doing, full screen professional or full page professional artwork. So, it's funny to see that dichotomy in the same magazine.
And if you follow, there's a link in the Boing Boing article that actually links back to the original over at worldwritable.com. There are a bunch more companies covered there. There's the screenplay. And let's see, what else do we have here? And there's Synergistic Software with the Crisis Mountain artwork. Hello, David. And a few other really popular games. App Venture to Atlantis. Remember that one? A lot of neat stuff to check out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how Byte and so many of those other 80s magazines stuck with illustrative cover art long after, Time and People and all those other mainstream magazines had all gone to photography. So I wonder why that was.
Because Apple II graphics weren't that great.
Yeah, I guess they could have shown photos of the hardware, but maybe that gets boring after a while.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of early computing was very much about the fantasy and the potential of what they could do compared to, which was often quite different from what they actually did at the time. There was visions of internets and things, but in fact, there was crappy modems and teenage bulletin boards that were all ASCII. So there was some need for fantasy there, perhaps.
I would think so, yes.
All right, moving along. What's Ultimate Micro up there, Mike?
Well, we've been talking about UltimateMicro, I think, almost as much as we talk about Jason Scott on this podcast. And this time they finalized the release of the new universal power supply. I think we talked about the fact that this was in planning and was upcoming, and they've actually got photographs, mock-up photographs over at atrucentral.com of what this kit's going to look like. And I think you can pre-order it. I don't know if they're selling it yet, but it's for it's sort of interesting. It has some dotted lines that say things like break for Vulkan inner drive, so that you actually snap the PCB in the place that you need it for the power supply that you're building, so that you can have a power supply that's compatible with any Apple II or Apple III. Yay!
Yeah, this thing is a really great idea, actually. It's for anyone who isn't familiar with it, it's a modern power supply that's smaller than the smallest that any Apple II could need, and then it comes with this PCB, this circuit board that's actually just sort of a mounting plate for it. And as you say, it has these perforations at various different lengths, and you break it off as needed. So it will fit inside the existing metal box that your Apple II has. Everything from, an Apple III to a 2GS to a 2GS with a Vulkan to an early, Rev Zero Apple II to, the later 2 Pluses where they changed to a different, brand of power supply. It's got, breaking points and mounting holes for every single one of these. It's really clever. And in fact, Chris Torrance, again, has a nice review of that. So we can link to that in the show notes as well.
Lucky bastard. So yeah, you can pre-order these now, and it looks like they're saying that they're going to start shipping around July 15th, which is right about KansasFest time. So I bet there will be a few there available to buy as well.
I bet. Maybe if you get on the KFest mailing list, maybe you can talk to Henry Corbis and see if he'll bring you something.
Indeed.
All right. Well, if you can't make it to KFest because you're over in Europe, you might make it to Apple II Festival France. Looks like that's coming up around the same time, right?
Yeah, that was announced recently over at Apple2FestivalFrance.fr. The page is in French, but the basic details are that this is going to be happening around early August 2016. And I imagine if you run this thing through the standard Google Translate page, you'll get everything that you need.
Cool. All right. Let's see. This next item is yours, Mike. Yeah, it looks like The Atlantic has got an article on retro computing, sort of.
Yeah, Quinn, you're moving faster than I can open tabs here. Let's see.
Life moves fast, Mike. You got to keep up. I think
that's right.
That was almost a line from Ferris Bueller, but not quite.
Almost. There's a photo of. It starts out with a photo of. I can't tell. Is that an actual Apple IIc or is that one of Charles Mangan's minis?
Yeah, it was shot with a tilt shift lens. I think that's why.
Is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah, it's a real IIc, but it looks toy-like because of how they've shot it. Yeah.
Anyway, the game that they've got loaded up there is Batman: The Caped Crusader, which was released in 1988, and. But the article itself is on how early computer games influenced internet culture, and it talks about the virtual play spaces of the 80s and BBSs and all the good retro stuff that we love to read and talk about here. So check out the article for sure.
Yeah, I like this article because it does talk about some other non-Apple II stuff as well, but it's definitely heavy on the Apple II, and it's clearly written by someone who, for realsies, grew up with the Apple II, not just someone who used it in junior high or whatever, because, there's references to, Lemonade Stand and, that kind of stuff that, like, you played if you were a real Apple II user, not just someone who played Oregon Trail in between assignments. And there's, some quotes from friend of the show, Elaine Nooney, in there. So yeah, awesome. Always nice to hear from her. And some excellent screenshots, although the screenshots are clearly taken from an emulator because there's no fringe or anything in them, but no. Still nice to see.
Also, Boo Atari for having a 2600 picture in there.
Yeah, every article about old technology has to have a 2600 in there.
Yeah, apparently, yes.
It's like a rule. All right. Well, speaking of hardcore Apple II users, we got a Brutal Deluxe did a little tribute to the French United Crackers clan. This article's kind of a fun read.
Yeah, we'll let you guys figure out what the acronym is there, but basically this was a cracking group that was active in France in the 80s, and they The article has released the names of the members, as in their handles and the cracks, and then the cracks include. It looks like they all took place between 88 and 90. Bubble Ghost, Chessmaster 2100, Pirates, Strip Poker 2, Alien Mind, Arkanoid 2 with the fixed version, and Tunnels of Armageddon. And they've got pictures of all the crack screens there, and you can download a nice little disk image that has all the software and all their crack screens. So pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was just glad to see Alien Mind on there, honestly. It's by far my favorite 2GS game. That game is just absolutely amazing. But it's a really fun read, both because I'm sure that a lot of people, you've probably seen these crack screens. If you used a 2GS at all, you might not have realized who the people were that were behind those screens. And it's also cool to see he talks about how this group became Miami Software, producing when they made a run at producing commercial software like Sensei, which some of us of course know, we've talked about on the show before. So it's kind of cool. You don't, I think as a user at the time, not sort of seeing the machinations of all these different groups and people, you might not have realized that, oh, these are the same people. Those guys that put dirty pictures in front on crack screens for Alien Mind were the same people that that produced Sensei. So that's kind of neat to see. And the other thing I like about this article is that it is sort of a window into the culture that some of these cracking groups had. I think we should acknowledge that at the same time we can respect and admire their programming chops, but we have to recognize that there was also some pretty terrible cultural things going on there. They talk about the history of their port of Teenage Queen to the 2GS, which is a strip poker game for underage girls. So I don't think we have to say much more about that, but I think we need to be aware of the cultural impact or cultural legacy that some of these cracking groups, I think, set up for technology later on.
Indeed.
Awesome programming that was happening. No doubt about that.
Yeah. Hey, Quinn, are you a fan of mobile gaming?
I am, in fact. I work in that very field.
Well, so then obviously you've heard of Structress, and even if you're not a mobile gamer, if you've been to KansasFest in the past couple of years, you've heard of Structress. This is sort of the game tournament that happens throughout the week and culminates, I think, Friday or Saturday night. This is an addicting little game that was put together by KansasFest's own Martin Hay. And the gaming contest itself actually stretches back a number of years. They used to play a game called Dualtris, and that sort of faded out for a little while, and I think if I recall correctly, Martin wanted to bring something back, and so he's gotten to, and so he created this for the actual Apple IIs. You would take turns on your Apple IIc or whatever. And recently he got together with Bill Martins and Brian Weiser, friends of the show, over at Call Apple, and they put together an iOS version. They announced it, I don't know if they actually made an official announcement. I know some of the news blogs and podcasts got an email saying it was coming out, but then there were some bugs that they had to correct. Well, the final version is now released. It's on the Apple, it's on the store, and it's I know.
The iOS App Store?
Yeah, there you go. iOS App Store for $1.99, and it's definitely worth playing.
Yeah, this thing is really fun. It's got the same look as the original. It's got the low-res graphics with the 4 lines of text at the bottom in the correct Apple II font and everything. So it looks very much like an Apple II game, but it doesn't have all obviously the fringe and the blur and everything. So it's it's kind of nice. It's cool. It looks like a fun download.
Absolutely. And our final news piece today is more from UltimateMicro. They've released a new scalable oscillator for your TranswarpGS or your ZipGSX. If you recall, I think last year when they released or when they announced that they had made these clones, they also announced that they had made the scalable oscillator, which is really awesome because it allows you to set the speed that your Transwarp or your ZipGSX is going to run at, and you don't have to go and swap a new oscillator every time you want to step it down, a tenth of a megahertz or something like that, or up one. This new version has now been custom tailored to fit each board better. It uses a better grade clock IC, which provides a cleaner signal. And although with this better signal came complexity of design, the item comes now with a power LED letting you know that it's working, and a resettable fuse on the +5 power line to protect the board from any damage related to shorts. So awesome.
Fine work going on over there at UltimateMicro.
Yeah.
Does anyone ever call you Ultimate Mike? I feel like they should.
I'm afraid not. No, usually it's inferior Mike, half Mike, things like that.
Not just a Mike.
No, probably not. There's all kinds of puns just waiting to happen there, I'm sure.
All right. Well, that's our news. Let's do a little bit of feedback, shall we?
Yeah, sounds good.
You've listened to us talk. Now it's time to tell us what you think.
First thing I've got is from David Schroeder, who, of course, we spoke to on the show a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And and of course, we referenced him earlier in this show, in fact. General awesome human being, David Schroeder. He wrote in to let us know that Dino Eggs Rebirth has gotten the Steam green light. When we interviewed them a couple of months ago, they were working towards that, but had not yet achieved it. So they got the green light on Steam for Dino Eggs Rebirth, and they've set a release date of June 9th, which should be plenty of time for you to hear this show when it goes out. So get on over to Steam and pick up pick up Dino Eggs Rebirth.
Yeah, you can't buy the whole Steam store. Well, I guess you could if you were really rich. But
could. That might be a little spendy, yeah. A lot of hard drive space, too. He also points out that it's very fitting that it should come out in 2016 because it is the 33rd anniversary of the original Dino Eggs, which is kind of awesome. And it makes me feel old. So Dino Eggs Rebirth will support Steam Achievements, Steam Cloud Saves, Steam Leaderboards, and this is cool. He's got a 2-person cooperative multiplayer.
Wow.
As well as a wide range of competitive multiplayer games that it always did have. They've added more languages. So they now support Italian and Japanese, French, Spanish, German, and Dutch. So lots of localizations there. Mm-hmm. And more graphic options to get closer to the original Apple version if you want that look. So available for Windows, macOS, and Linux. So run, don't walk to Steam and pick that up.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Next item I've got is from frequent writer and fan of the show, Herb, and he writes in to say, first, thanks, Mike, for taking Calgary's snow this year. We referenced the crazy blizzard you had. To follow up a bit on RCR number 5 host topic, that was what to do with your collections when you get old and die and nobody else wants them. I've been noticing that the typical high-valued Apple II-related peripherals have been on the decline recently. I'm speculating that the deep-pocketed collectors have pretty much acquired their desired items, whether they be TranswarpGS, ZipGS, 3.5 drive controllers, etc. The final builds are less than half of what I've seen a year and a half ago. It seems it's too late to cash in on the peak values. I think we've gone past the peak of the crazy prices, and as more of us age and leave this plane, the demand will continue to drop. It looks like we're in a buyer's market, so to speak. And let's see. He says about Reactive Micro's 3.5 drive controller. I don't think the AEHD Plus drive required the controller to achieve 1.6 megabytes. In fact, I think you mentioned that on the show, Mike, that they just had a custom driver. And for those who want, this is interesting, for those who want a 1.44 meg capacity and can't find a super drive, there are plenty of used internal Mac drives that can be swapped out into the 800K enclosure. And it will operate as an 800K drive without the controller or a 1.44 drive with it. So that's a really cool bit of insider knowledge. I did not realize you could take an HD Mac drive and drop it into a 2GS drive enclosure and use it with the 3.5 drive controller. So that's very cool stuff. So what do you think about that, Mike? Do you think prices are dropping on the unobtainium things on eBay?
Well, it's been a while since I've had to look because, like he I think correctly mentions, a lot of people who are collecting have the stuff that they need, and probably have backups for when things break and extra parts and stuff. So I don't know. I don't know if things are beyond their peak value because sometimes you log in and you can find a beat up Apple II Plus for $25, and sometimes the cheapest beat up Apple II Plus is well over $100. I think that may just be more of an eBay thing, but there are plenty of hidden deals and Craigslist stuff and things like that out there to be found, but eBay is still the largest market for this stuff. So, I don't know that how accurate it is to say, well, that's just a weird eBay thing when they're the biggest market. But prices right now seem to be a little bit down. So, and who knows when or if they'll go back up again. So, if you're looking for something, now might be the time. The other thing that we had talked about last time was that, as a specific example, all of these SD media cards for the Apple II and and even the Apple III have replaced a lot of the need for, floppy disk media and the hardware that you need to access that.
Yeah, and the media itself is dying too, which, if you can't get the media, that certainly hurts the value of the drives.
Right.
Yeah.
And the cards and things are still out there and they're still scarce. But, do you really need and it's great to have a super drive controller if you're looking for look what I got. But do you really need one these days? I think the answer is almost kind of no.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Herb's thesis is probably correct that, there's a sweet spot of those of us of a certain age who are nostalgic for this stuff and really want it. But, as we age out, let's not kid ourselves that there's some new generation that's going to come along and find this stuff as interesting as we do.
I'm sure that the worldwide market for Abacus collection is pretty small at this point. Even the hobbyists have mostly gone on to other things.
Yeah.
And then again, this brings up the kind of collection that you want. Are you the kind of person who wants an Apple IIGS with only original parts in it? Or do you are you okay with having one of these replacement power supplies from Reactive Micro? Or do you want, are you okay with having the internal, SD, mass media controller in there as long as you can hang off the 3.5-inch floppy drives on the outside so it looks right? Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder if there's an analogy to be drawn from arcade collecting. That's another hobby that I'm sure we have a lot of overlap in our audience. And, it used to be the high demand items were the 80s games, the Ms. Pac-Mans and so on. And nowadays, that market has kind of gone quite soft, and the prices are shooting up on the 90s games, the sort of second generation of arcades, the Brawlers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and The Simpsons, and so on. So I wonder if there's going to be something similar happening in retro computing where, there will be a rise in prices for, early PC stuff, or I don't know why, because that stuff was all commodity kind of garbage at the time. It wasn't anything particularly special, but, who knows? Or maybe early smartphones. Maybe there'd be some retro rejuvenation of the first iPhone in 5 years or 10 years. Who knows?
You think there'll be a bubble on unopened copies of Windows 95 OSR2 and the Plus Pack and things like that?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine people being nostalgic for commodity PC hardware, but you never know. There's definitely nostalgia for DOS games, so maybe
it's really I think what you grew up with, because the mainframe guys look at us like, why do you want that junk? So
yeah, our stuff was just toys to them, and and 5 years after the Apple II, it was all garbage. So it was only 20 years later that suddenly it was special again. So
I know. I know Sean Fahey over at a2central.com was at one point on a quest to build an entirely applied engineering peripherals Apple II, and it was interesting that he was actually having trouble finding some of the more esoteric hardware that they put out in their final years. But I know that was the thing that he was doing. I don't know if he ever finished that. So Sean, write in, let us know what happened there.
Yeah, and I think every generation has nostalgia for whatever they grew up with, and we're not special in that way. And in fact, Rob Flack O'Hara has talked about in his podcast. He's recently, one of his many podcasts, he's put together a 486 PC for DOS gaming, and it's again commodity hardware, nothing special, but to him that was nostalgic. So. It's not for us to say,
but
right. Enjoy your Apple stuff while you've got it,
and while you're on the planet to enjoy it.
That's right. All right, moving right along, we got an email from listener Jerry, who writes in to say, hey, hello, Quinn and Mike. I love your podcast. Well, thank you very much. You should note you have at least 3 listeners. Woo. Excellent. First thing, forget the naysayers. Make the show as long or short as you want. Why, thank you. I prefer the longer ones, but if they're shorter, I'm happy that they are there for me to listen to. Appreciate that. Also, I've heard you mention the scarcity of DB19 connectors a number of times. I don't remember when, but just a few years ago, within the last 5, I bought these to go with my Apple II SmartPort VHD by Cedric Pelletier, who I understand has sort of disappeared. Anyhow, a quick web search, and this outfit looks like it still sells them, and he links to a company called HelloCables.com. So I wanted to mention this because this is one of those things where it really looks like they're for sale. But if you click through and if you try to actually order them, you find that they aren't. Either you get linked to some other site where they're out of stock, or oftentimes these sort of sketchy looking connector component companies are just portals for they're kind of scraping the stock of other companies, warehouses and so on, and it's kind of a B2B sort of situation. And they'll take your order, but then they route the order through to some other company or warehouse that claims to have the item. And then when that happens, it turns out the other company's website or their database wasn't up to date, and they don't have the item. And so you find out, your order gets rejected. So that's what tends to happen. Again, big mess of wires. Steve Chamberlain has written about this a lot, where it looks like you can buy these things all over the internet, but when you actually try to, they don't exist. So, but thanks for writing in to tell us about that. Appreciate it. In fact, on that subject, I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but Steve Chamberlain has actually decided to make a run of these connectors himself. Obviously, the minimum order is huge, and he's going to end up with more of them than he can ever use in any lifetime. But he decided it's the only way to get them, and he still needs them for his floppy emus and other devices. So if you want any of these connectors, I'm sure Steve would be thrilled to sell you some.
For only a minimum markup.
Yeah, honestly, he'd probably sell them to you. I don't want to speak for him, but he'd probably sell them to you at cost just to get rid of them, because I think he had to order something like 100,000 of these things, or 10,000, or maybe it was 5,000 anyway.
Wow.
More
Even
than
that's a lot.
Yeah, more than a human could ever need for retro hardware. All right, moving along. Listener Brian writes in to say, "Hi there, love the podcast. Have been listening faithfully since episode 1. Wow. That is dedication.
You're a brave man, sir. Congratulations."
He says, enjoyed the Bill Budge episode.
Is strong.
Yes. He says, enjoyed the Bill Budge episode. So sorry the technicals were such a pain. Yeah, tell me about it. It makes me love the instant on Apple II even more. Yeah, that's for sure. He says, I'm writing because Quinn has inspired me somewhat to dabble more with electronics. Unfortunately, I don't have her skills. Well, my skills are an illusion, actually. I'm just really good at Googling. So I'm not able to do much. I was looking into a way to get my Apple IIc composite video output to be changed to green or amber to connect to my Commodore 1702. This seems like a much bigger project than I'm capable of. He says, I'm wondering if you know if such a device or product exists out there that will take the composite video and allow tweaking of the color for the old monochrome green or amber I remember. I've heard of other devices mentioned on the podcast, so I thought I'd check with the experts. All right, Brian, well, there's a couple of things going on there. So first and foremost, the composite signal is actually just a composite signal. It can be color or black and white, but how the monitor renders it is separate from that. So there are old monitors that are green and there are old ones that are amber, but the composite signal going into them is the same. So it'll take, whether you're feeding it a black and white or a color composite signal, it will render it as green or amber if it's a green or amber monitor. So if you've got a monitor that takes a composite input, you should just connect it and it should just do what you want. Now, that said, the Apple II, as we've talked about a lot, doesn't have quite a standard composite signal. It's a black and white signal that relies on artifacting to generate colors, so a lot of monitors don't like that. But if it's a monitor of that generation, it should be fine. And now, if you want to get that green or amber effect on a more modern display, I would definitely recommend Plowman's over at A2 Heaven. He has the Apple IIc to VGA adapter. It's a thing that plugs into your video expansion port on the 2C. And it actually has modes for green and amber display. So you can actually get that look on a modern LCD. I have one of those, and it's awesome. I recommend it highly.
One thing that you might look into if you're looking to be able to switch colors to switch from a color situation to a quote green situation is these are very difficult to find and they're expensive, but if you can, the Apple Color Monitor 100 is a digital XRGB, which can also be made to do analog, but it has a switch that goes from color to green right there in the little control panel. So if you can find one, you can do that too.
Yeah, the Laser 128 also had a switch that would go to black and white, which was
I think some of the Franklins did too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really handy if you were doing something text heavy, or it was great for GEOS because it takes out all of the color fringe that you get. It just gives you a pure black and white double high res video, which has made GEOS look amazing. So definitely recommend it for that. All right, well, that's all the feedback I have. Did you have anything, Mike?
No, well, we did get one that was submitted to the website that basically said, "Hey, run your audio through Levelator, darn it!" And Quinn had actually mentioned that to me as well on the previous one. I had tried to get away from that a little bit just because it does weird things to the drops and the music between the clips. But I think overall the effect is better. And yeah, my skills just aren't that good at for when it comes to audio engineering. So we apologize for any of that, and look for more of that in the future.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone's understanding that we are not audio engineers. The April episode went out. That one was run through Levelator. So if people thought that was better, please let us know. It's not always easy to see the forest for the trees in your own work. So we appreciate people's feedback on that.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for this month. Any closing thoughts, Mike?
No. Thanks again for listening and tuning in. And of course, thank you to Kevin Savetz for generously donating this month's interviews.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again, Kevin Buatari, and yay, Kevin Savetz.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.
Serious presents Podmania!